Thanks for listening to the Music Production Podcast. One of the best ways to keep up with my work is by joining the Music Production Club. My Music Production Club gets you access to my latest creations as soon as they're released. You also get exclusive packs, presets, samples, and templates that only come with the Music Production Club membership, as well as educational materials such as my books and my video courses. And then there's bonus materials you get just for joining. There's also a community of like-minded producers, and that's what I want to talk to you about today. In our Discord, we help each other make music, share tips and tricks, inspirations, and we also have our live meetings online over Zoom. And during those meetings, we have some sort of musical challenge, and we spend the first hour making music and the second hour sharing our music. And I want to show you some music we made in one of our last meetings. The parameters to our challenge for this meeting were to use my Ghosts Ableton Live Pack, my Trip Hop Drums Ableton Live Pack, the Dank Verb Impulse responses from Perform Module. Those are all included with your Music Production Club membership. And to use a scale you don't normally use that you're kind of unfamiliar with. Now I'd like to let you hear some of the music that we made during this live meeting. Here's a track called Aurora by Trev Phonic. And here's part of a jam from Psychotronic Squirt Gun. And this track was made by Sicken during the meeting. This track is by Animus Invidious, called Bazoo Falap. And here's what I made during our meeting. I used the whole tone scale. We all made these songs in about 45 minutes and then shared them with each other. And it's so cool that we had each other to kind of lean on, to motivate ourselves to do these tracks, to work together. And to hear what everyone made was so much fun. So much diversity in the sounds, all done with the same parameters, but totally different results. I'm really grateful to have a community of people that I can make music with like this. If you want to be part of this, check out the Music Production Club. Go to brianfunk.com/MPC. How's it going, everybody? And welcome to the Music Production Podcast. I'm your host, Brian Funk. On today's show, I have Brent Hendrich, and he's an award-winning mix engineer, producer, and all-around pretty interesting musical guy working out of Nashville. He specializes in pop music mixing. And I'm very excited to talk to him. I've been listening to his stuff and some of his other interviews, and he's got a lot to offer. And I think we got a lot to learn from Brent. Brent, thanks for being here.
Oh, Brian, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, my pleasure, man. I mentioned just now that I've listened to some of your other interviews, and we have a common thing from our past, which is parents' basement studio.
Oh, that's a fun place to start. Yeah, that's where it does all start.
I'm forever indebted to my parents, for raising me, but as well as just being the family that was allowing band practice to happen in their basement, and eventually came into like studio gear and stuff. And I thought that was a cool thing that you had the same as well. I was kind of curious. just how did you start? What were you using in that situation in the basement?
Yeah, that was the late 90s, so it was a lot different back then than it is now. I mean, it's so much easier to get a Focusrite interface and, Logic, and, for not a lot of money, you can kind of have your own studio. And so back then there was a lot fewer options. For me, I think I was probably 16. I was in high school. I was in a band. We did that first record together as a band at a studio that had, early system, a Pro Tools TDM system. And that's kind of when the bug bit me, where I was like, this is great. I want to, learn to do this myself. And so it was that second album, maybe my senior year in high school, that I was like, okay, let me see if I can figure out a way to get some of that same gear that we had at that studio when we did our first album, and maybe we can record our second album ourselves. I've always been kind of a DIY guy. And so I started just doing a little bit of shopping around, and like I said, there wasn't a lot on the market. I don't even know if Pro Tools had I don't remember maybe it was the Digi-001 that came first. I don't even know if that was quite out yet, but through a magazine ad or something, I saw that there was this company, Gadget Labs, that made like an 8-in and 8-out interface. And it was like $500. I'd been saving up money while working at Chick-fil-A all through high school, and bought that $500 interface, and it connected with one of those big like printer cables to this 550 megahertz Hewlett-Packard compute, like the family computer. So I set that up in my bedroom and got the interface going, and had Cakewalk Pro Audio 9, which was, one of the DAWs back then that was available. And the Waves Native Power Pack is what it was called. It was like early Waves, where it was just like the basic C1 compressor and the Q1 through 10 EQ, and maybe like True Verb, and there wasn't much there. It was super expensive too back then. And so with that, and a Mackie mixer for preamps and some mics that I borrowed from the church, and it just kind of threw something together. And we ended up recording our second record in Cubase, and we burned everything to CDs, sent it to someone to have it mastered. And so it was a really cool experience. That was a great place to learn, and just make a lot of mistakes, and still probably develop some bad habits. But that's when I knew that I wanted to do it for the rest of my life. And so I just started talking with my parents about it. They were always super supportive of, they're supportive of me doing whatever I was really passionate about. And they knew that was audio. And so I started looking at my options. I grew up in East Tennessee. And so Nashville made a lot of sense. It was only about a 5-hour drive from where I grew up. And the options were basically MTSU, which is Middle Tennessee State, Belmont, which is a school that's well known for their music program, and then SAE, School of Audio Engineering, had just opened up the year before there on Music Row. And so, I talked with some mentors at the time, and kind of got the advice that it made more sense for me to not do the university path. And I was looking at Belmont, and I'm really glad that I kind of made that decision and chose SAE. I was in and out of there in I think 9 months maybe, and at 19 was already doing internships with a few people here in Nashville in the industry that were doing really, really great work. And so I got to, learn from them. So I kind of had like the DIY thing in high school in my bedroom, and then, got to learn just more like signal flow and polar patterns and all those kinds of things that I knew nothing about when I was doing it myself. And then after that, I got to do several years with some professionals and kind of learn, some techniques, things that they don't teach you in school, how to make guitars big, or how to get a great acoustic guitar sound, or, those kinds of things. So I think kind of between those three things, it was kind of a real nice all around, path that I was on, and was able to get through all of that and, be freelance in my early 20s, which was what I wanted. I've always wanted to be kind of my own boss and make the final calls as to, how the project kind of turns out. So.
Right. Yeah, that's awesome, because you got kind of the exploration on your own, then you got a bit of education, and then you got the kind of real world, here we go.
Yeah, here's how we deal with clients that are difficult, or, what do you do when they don't show up for the session on time? How do you, so I got to, my mentors were really, really, great in kind of giving me a nice head start. That's for sure.
I think that so much of this is really about what you can do. And there's like a hard question, I guess, for a lot of young kids coming out of high school, go to college is a really serious decision. And I think it's really given almost like it's just what you do. That's what they kind of teach you. And just what you do is, taking in all kinds of student loan debt and making really serious decisions about your life that it's going to affect you for a long time when you really have no idea what anything's about, coming out of high school.
Yeah.
But it seems like that path is a pretty nice way because you got, like you said, you got some of the technical stuff, but then you got right in there and started working. And I think those are just such great programs when you can get that.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, in 20 years of doing this professionally, not one client has asked, where I went to school. No one cares, It's all about what your work sounds like and how well you take care of your clients. And that's really all that matters in this industry. I think, if you were forced or, encouraged by your parents to do the university path, I think that, maybe going to school for something other than, audio engineering or whatever that looks like, might make more sense, a business degree or a marketing degree or something like that. I think, something that's going to help you kind of grow your business and kind of on the side, maybe you can be learning a lot of those, those techniques. There's so it's a lot different than when I first moved to Nashville, 23 years ago. I mean, there was so much great content, all over the web between YouTube and Mix with the Masters and podcasts like this. And I mean, you can just consume content for days and days and days and just learn so much from so many different people. I think between that, if you're disciplined enough and can consume those kinds of things while also doing some projects on your own and trying to find also a mentor that you can work for, I think that's kind of like the secret recipe that I tell people, to do something more along those lines. And you won't have any student debt and you'll just get to where you want to go a little bit quicker. You can start building out that portfolio because that's really all people, like I said, care about is what does your work sound like and do they connect with it? Do they want to hire you,
Right. It's like the kind of thing, like we get so focused with education, with test scores and things like that. And I always say to my students at the high school level, if you were going to get a house built, what do you want to see? Do you want to see like how well somebody did on the carpentry exam? Or do you want to see the house?
Yeah.
That's kind of the approach I do with my students is like, I want to see what you can do. Show me, I'm going to give you a test on it. And I think the same thing with music, especially. I mean, who cares like what you get on a multiple choice exam about like music theory or even just, all kinds of engineering stuff. It's so much more about what you can do. And a lot of that stuff anyway is pretty subjective where it might work in one area and be totally different in another.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah. But I like that you also said, you can consume as much as you want online, but you also do projects. Get the work in there because that's the trap too, is you can there's limitless education and that can almost be a form of procrastination and avoiding the work.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, I think you can take that money that you put into going to, a school and just invest that in a little bit of gear. It doesn't even take much. I think for, just even a few $1,000s, you can do so much with getting you just get a laptop and an interface and, and a DAW. And that, that's enough to really be able to at least start recording some friends or whoever will allow you to, to get your hands dirty a little bit and make some mistakes. And I think that's where you're really going to do a lot of learning. And when you have that intern in place as well, then you can kind of take some of the things you've been learning from them and apply that to your world. I did a lot of that early on as well, as just kind of stealing from them a bit.
And you mentioned maybe get a business or marketing degree. And even before we started recording, we were talking about cameras. And I don't know about you, I'm not into photography it's nothing I've ever done and as for myself as an art or anything. Web design is something I've never done for fun, but music pulls you into all these unusual places that you never expected. I was kind of wondering like what sort of things as a freelancer have you found yourself doing that probably, 18-year-old Brent would have never imagined was on his path to become an audio engineer?
I like that question. Yeah, because that's something that I talk with, beginners or interns all the time. It's like, you need to have like chops when it comes to this, whatever it is, mixing or mastering or producing or all the above, but also, you're a business and you've got to operate that way. I mean, I tell people I'm a janitor and I'm an accountant and I'm going to, do marketing and sales and web design and all of those things, content creation, social media management, whatever you want to call it. I mean, it's all part of, what you need to be doing as a business. And, so that's a lot of things I probably wasn't thinking about at the time, but, over the years I've learned how to use WordPress and, how to talk with my CPA about things and, cleaning, like I'm the janitor, I'm clean, I've got to keep my studio clean. That's me, that's a small thing, but, hiring.
Well, no one wants to go to a dump, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I don't have many guests anymore since I mix, but, even for me, I need to keep it that way, I guess. But even, hiring photographers for, promotional images for a website, all of those kinds of things. It's part of just being a business. And that's kind of why I say, if going and getting like a sales or marketing or business degree might even make more sense, and minoring in whatever it is you want to do in music. And then if you decide later on you don't want to do music, then you've got a really solid, degree that you could use in some other industry as well, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's great advice, because that's a lot of the stuff I've had to educate myself on. No idea it was coming up, and next thing you know, you're like learning how to do a video editing software, or what can I write off for taxes, like all this stuff that's just not the glamorous side of what we picture.
No, but it's just as important. I mean, you've got to do that stuff to try and, get other people's attention, especially on the marketing side of things, just keeping up with social media. I mean, being top of mind, I think is something that's really important. There's a lot of other people doing this as well. And I think, it's good for other engineers, producers to be out there kind of showing off what, they're working on and all those things. I mean, it's just any other business would be doing the same kind of thing. So it's a little uncomfortable sometimes at first, but I think it's really important for everyone to be good at selling themselves.
Yeah, good point. Now, you've done a lot of different types of work within production or mixing, engineering, but you've kind of now decided to really hone in on pop music mixing. So not even just mixing, but specifically pop music. I'm curious, like, what drew you to that? Was there something like that you enjoyed about that particular? And it's also very specific too.
Yeah. Being specific is very important to me right now. I just want to keep kind of niching down more and more and more the longer that I do this. But, my love for pop music started really, kind of early on in my career, even in the early 2000s when, you had the Kelly Clarksons or the Avril Lavignes or the Ashley Simpsons or I'm trying to think of a lot of that female or like early Katy Perry stuff. I was really into a lot of those records. Any of the Max Martin, Dr. Luke records, John Shanks, who was doing a lot of the Michelle Branch. So that was kind of like when I first really fell in love with pop music. But then at the time I was just, I was doing a little bit of everything. I was tracking and I was producing and I was writing and I was mixing. I was kind of like one-stop shop other than, I was outsourcing mastering for every record that I worked on. But just over the years, I've kind of gotten to a place where I just want to like become more and more of a specialist. And so I think the first shift was a few years ago when I decided I'm going to no longer do production. I'm just going to be focusing on mixing. And that's all I am now, is I'm a mixer. And so that was kind of like phase one, was just kind of honing in on that because that's what I wanted to be doing. That's what I was best at. That's what people kept hiring me to do. You can work remotely that way. My room is set up for it. There's a lot of reasons why mixing is kind of what I wanted to kind of hone in on. But then I just decided I want to become even more of a specialist. I think of like a lot of the mixers that I like, they're kind of like that as well. Serban being one of my favorites, but then like Spike Stent and Manny Maricklin and some of those guys as well. They're kind of known as like the top 40 pop mixers. They do a lot of that kind of stuff. And so I just, between my love for pop music and my love for mixing, I just kind of wanted to bring those together and just kind of start to you know, paint this picture that that's who I am, that's what I do. So yeah, mixing is what I do best, and pop music is the music that I enjoy working on the most. So it's like this kind of perfect combination of the two. That's kind of, I guess, when I'm at my very best is when I am mixing a pop song. So if that makes any sense.
Yeah, totally. Is it something about the style, or is it the techniques that go behind it? Because there's definitely a much different approach.
It's the it's how concise it is, the minimalism, the just getting to the point, the hooks, how hi-fi the sounds are. That's kind of, I think, why I like it. And it's always evolving. You know, I feel like something like jazz or country or rock, you know, I feel like it doesn't evolve as quickly maybe as pop music. You know, pop music can kind of be all over the place. Not long ago, it was almost more EDM influence, but then now you're hearing like, you know, more, you know, alternative or like guitars and things coming back around. So I feel like it kind of turns around a lot quicker than some of the other genres. So I enjoy that. Just kind of having to always, you know, be on my toes and follow the trends and keep up with the trends. I think that's another reason that I really enjoy it as well. But yeah, that's probably why I love pop music.
Yeah, it's definitely always kind of cutting edge sound. I guess that's by definition, you know, what it is. It's the new thing, and
it appeals to a wide audience too. You know, that's the thing I like about it is
which is a hard thing to do.
Yeah, it really is. It really is.
How would you do you find there's different approaches in the actual technical stuff? Say compared to like you're doing country, rock, then you get to pop. Different considerations, because so much of this is subjective. And something I was thinking about recently was I play in a 3-piece garage rock band. It's dirty, you know, rough around the edges stuff. And we were listening to a bunch of different records to try to figure out what we wanted ours to sound like. And, you know, the guys would bring me songs, check this out. We want to sound like this. And everything is so different. You know, one track, the vocal's totally buried. The next one, it's way up loud. Then the snare is real dark, and then it's real bright on this. I mean, and there's no right answer. How do you, I'm trying to form my question here for you, but I guess it's like, do you find it's more, is it kind of like more specific where there's like you mentioned, like trends you follow and very true. Like we had like basically pop was EDM, and then there was a lot of country in it. And now you're starting to hear like the 90s alternative come back a little in there. Is there any kind of commonality, I guess, as
commonality
with your mixes when you're doing pop?
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if this answers your question, but when I think about pop, I think about something that when it's given to me, it's something that's already closer to the finish line than maybe if I were to receive files on a country record or a rock record. I think, you know, with those records, I have more freedom maybe in a mix like that. Whereas pop music, it seems like the producer and the artist have already established this very specific vision, and they've done more mixing along the way as opposed to other genres where it's like maybe they've just got an EQ on something or a compressor on something. It's like with pop music, there might be 10 different plugins on this vocal chop making this very specific sound, you know? And so I think the difference for me, working on pop music is it's more about taking like what they've created and then finishing it as opposed to starting from scratch and mixing something. That's kind of the biggest difference that I see. And I don't know if that answers your question, but for me, I'm focused more on just getting in the heads of the producer and the artist early on before I even start, and kind of figuring out, okay, like, do you like where you've left it? And then, you know, where now, like how far should I take it from here, and how much like flexibility or freedom do I have? Whereas I feel like with other genres, it's like, here's the files, you know, we're excited to hear what you do with it, you know, kind of thing. And so I think that's the biggest difference as far as, you know, commonality. I don't know. I don't know if there is.
Question.
Yeah. No, I think I know what you're saying, but yeah, but I will say that the way that I approach a pop mix is going to be different than probably how I would approach a mix in a different genre. Where, like I said, I think it's just I would have more freedom in other genres. Whereas as pop, it's like I need to kind of be a little bit more careful that I keep that vision intact when I'm working.
Right. And you kind of got into what I was trying to put into words there before, that idea that I guess, like, if you get like a band recording, there's not all that crazy sound design kind of stuff.
Right.
Like the drums weren't produced a certain way. There's a lot of, it's more natural sounding. So you kind of have like your leeway with that. But when it's something that's kind of got all sort of futuristic production on it, then you got to really respect that, I guess.
Yeah, and that's where keeping up with like trends, I think, is important, because it's like, okay, well, what's cool now, like how did they get there sonically, and oftentimes it's, techniques that I I'm finding myself using a lot, and this is something that I think it's probably applies a lot to like the pop genres. Lots of saturation, big bottom end, big airy top end, like tons of detailed automation, lots of effects throws and scene changes, and big dynamic changes from verses to choruses, a highly processed mix bus, some of those kinds of things like feel a bit more pop specific, as opposed to, I may not be that heavy handed in a genre that's more of what maybe someone would call organic, where it's just like a 3-piece, where you just got drums, bass, guitars, and a couple of vocals. With that, it's more of maybe just the typical kind of, the OG stuff, the basic, compression and EQ. I may not be pulling up a ton of like multi-band or, soothe, or like it may not be as much of like creating these really precise kind of sounds. And that's more of what I think of like pop music is like making space for everything, and a little bit maybe more tidy than other genres.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking about that a bit, because you've got these more instrumental things that you want it to sound like it is, but pop has definitely got, and this might be like electronic music too, where there's so many options where you can go. For me, going back to the band record again, as we were recording, it really took us a minute to like decide where we're going with this. So do we want it to sound natural? Because I've been fooling around a lot with like all kinds of crazy production techniques, and I got these synthesizers over here, and we can really have some fun if you want. And we had to like say, now let's try to make it representative of what the band sounds like. That's one direction. It's just a choice. You have some pretty interesting ways of figuring that out, though, I understand, with your artists or the people you're working with when you receive a mix, that you have a kind of a way of figuring out what they want. You have an intake form, you said, and you like to do like consultations.
It's something that it took me a while to learn, and I think I had to really learn it once I started working like primarily in the pop space, just because, like I said, there is a bit more of like this established vision, or it's already like almost halfway mixed sometimes by the time I receive the files. And so, I have an intake form on my website. It's just kind of like a hidden link, and I can send that to the producer or the artist. And it just kind of walks them through a lot of different questions, asking about references, how attached are they to the current rough mix, adjectives to kind of check different boxes to describe kind of what you're looking for. Do you want the vocal up in the mix? Do you want it tucked? If you do have a reference, what are the things you like about that reference song that you want me to kind of chase? There's all of these questions that kind of helps me kind of get a better idea of what they're looking for. And then a phone call is always great too. Those are the two things that really help me a lot before I ever dive into a mix. And I found that just doing that before even starting makes it so much easier for me, and it ensures that first mix that I send to them is as close as it can possibly be to what I think they're looking for. So, I encourage everyone who mixes to do something like that. It doesn't take much time. It will help you, and they'll feel like they're a bit more involved with the mixing process as well, which I think is valuable, because when they receive that first mix, there's a little bit of ownership there. They're like, yeah, this is good. I like steered him in this direction,
Right.
And so, I think it's been a great, addition to, my world. And so I think, anyone needs to be doing something like that.
Yeah, it gives you a good starting place. Probably saves you a ton of time as well. Just that you've got the right thing going, and not just kind of your own idea where who knows where you might decide the song should go.
Right.
And,
Yeah. I mean, it's if for some reason they check that they want it, to feel really dry, and I don't know that, I may be putting a bunch of verb on a bunch of things, thinking that it feels really cool, super wet. And, so just by them checking that one box before I start the mix, it lets me know, hey, I need to be careful not to get too crazy with verb. That's a very simple example, but that changes everything, with the way that the song comes across. So,
yeah. And again, like just as a freelancer, time is precious, and
it is. Yep.
The more you can get done, the more you can work. And again, to speak to what you were sort of saying earlier, the kind of like cleaning the studio stuff, the being a person that's easy to work with, that wants to know. I think that's a really important thing for people to feel, that you want to get them to where they want to go.
I think so, yeah. And just another idea that I had that's maybe worth mentioning is, those first few hours of a mix are the most precious, in my opinion. That's where you're like making the biggest, boldest moves that are going to kind of dictate where that mix is going to go. And if you don't really know like where it needs to go, and you're just kind of trying different things, you're kind of eating away at those precious few hours. But if you have a really good idea in your head, like, okay, they want vocal up, they want everything really dry, they want like it to feel super saturated, this is their reference has like massive bottom end, like knowing all those things, it's like, okay, I know that I'm going to push the bass up here and I'm going to treat the vocal this way. Like right in that initial like 30 minutes, I know all of those things. And because for me, it's like those big, bold moves happen, and then the back half of the mix is like the fine tuning. That's like writing the automation at 1/10 of a dB here, and doing this little thing here, and those small moves. But if you know like where they're wanting to go, and you make those big moves early on, then I think you're making the most of those precious few hours, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Right. Yeah, the big moves. So I'm wondering if it's pop. Obviously vocals are huge.
Vocals most important, always. Yeah.
I think that's kind of most genres, honestly. Whether I mean, maybe us as like mixers, producers, we like to think we're paying attention to all these little details, but even mixers and producers, I think when we first hear a song, that's the thing we're drawn to. It's what everyone else is drawn to. We hear the voice, we connect with that first. It's the thing we're, most evolved to take in as a species. So with that in mind, are you starting there, or do you bring in other elements first? Do you have a way of working, or is it just really?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's my thought process has changed over the years as I've gotten wiser. I've kind of approached it a little bit different. I mean, what I like to do is I'll bring all the files into my template. That's just something I've been refining for many, many years now, and I know where everything's at.
That's Cubase?
That is in Cubase. I've been in Cubase for, like 20 years. Started with Nuendo and then moved into Cubase.
And they're so kind of related, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. They're both made by Steinberg. Yep. Yeah. And so I just know it well. I'm mixing just, dry or wet audio files or stems. So it's not really a big deal for anyone. I'm not typically mixing from project files. If I absolutely have to, I'll find a way to make it work or pull it up somewhere else and bring it into my world. But and so once I do that, I'm trying to think of where I was going before I brought up the template thing. Oh yeah, how kind of what I approach first in a mix. Yeah. So used to, I would wait way too long to bring the vocal in. I would focus a lot more on the instrumentation, and then, now let's bring the vocal in and try to make it fit. Well, if the vocal is the most important thing, it deserves the most space in the mix, and everything else should be more supportive. So what I like to do, or try to do at least, and every mix is different. I kind of just mix instinctually, and sometimes it goes one way and sometimes it goes a different way. But I like to kind of get my gain staging into my mix bus right with like the kick and the snare, or the kick and the clap, or whatever like that that push and pull is in the drum side of things. And so once I get the groove roughly hitting like the mix bus where I want it with the mix bus plugins engaged and disengaged, I'll kind of get pretty close within a dB or so of where I want that to be. Then I'll start to bring in what I call like the star of the show or the most important instrument element of the song. Usually it's going to be like an acoustic guitar or a piano or a pad maybe sometimes, but usually it's a guitar or some type of keyed instrument. And I like to kind of work with that and the vocal as early on as I possibly can, and get those feeling really good together, maybe with the groove as well. And then I'll start maybe bringing in the bass and then the kind of the secondary kind of elements. Maybe that's, additional guitars and background vocals, those kind of come in towards the end. So that's the way I typically like to work, is getting a little bit of like that snappy transient groove thing coming in, and then bringing in the vocal and like kind of that one instrument that it's the best way to describe it is if you're going to do this live, it's like with one instrumentalist, like what is that person playing, and that's usually what it's typically like a chordal thing that runs throughout the entire song. And so I'm just getting those two working well together. So yeah, that's typically how I like to work.
It makes a lot of sense. And
yeah,
a mistake I make along the way a lot is building up the instruments one at a time a little too much.
Mm-hmm.
So I get the drums sounding great and it's filling up all my headroom.
Yeah.
And now I got to bring in the next element and I got no space for it. So I have to start bringing them back and changing things. It took me way too long to realize that it's all a sum, right?
Yep.
It's not these individual parts. And for me, the big realization was actually mixing bass and guitar, and drums, I guess too, where I wanted my guitars to be thick and heavy and bassy. I wanted my bass to be heavy. I want the kick drum I want everything to be heavy, but nothing is heavy in that world because they're now kind of all the same. I guess what I'm saying is it's all relative. You can't have something heavy if you don't have something to balance it out that's not heavy by comparison.
Yeah.
I guess I'm wondering if there are any kind of like really simple, basic insights you have that I think we tend to forget as we get into this, where we're slapping effects and compressors and we don't even know what we're doing half the time. But sometimes we lose the sense of the big picture. And I do this. It's like I can't resist sometimes. Like I want to hear these drums so big and huge to the point where there's nothing left in no space left for anything. You kept saying space a lot.
Yeah.
I found there's a lot of sacrifice that needs to be made to make things work together. Are there some kind of like really basic principles you like to follow, things you like to keep in mind while you're mixing, while you're trying to make things work together?
Yeah, I mean, the big things for me are like not processing something just because you have the capability of doing that. I think lots of times people just pull up a bass and like, oh, I need a compressor, I need an EQ, I need this, I need R bass, and without even really spending the time thinking about, does it actually need that? I think sometimes we overprocess things more than we need to, so I think that's one thing. I think another thing is these are all just things that I encourage, like as beginners especially, to think about. It's really easy to work visually now, and it's so easy to just start removing frequencies because they look weird on a spectrum analyzer on your Pro Q3. That frequency might need to be there. That might be like the fundamental goodness that you want. And just because it looks weird doesn't mean that it needs to be removed, and so, and this is kind of tied with the next one, which is like, I think it's really easy to work in solo a lot. And this is something I talk about all the time because I used to be really bad about this, and it's just a habit that I've really, over the years broken. But, it's so easy just to solo something and go, ooh, that like 550 hertz and that whatever vocal sounds really weird. And so you just start taking it out because it sounds weird in solo. But then if you weren't in solo, it wouldn't have bothered you, or maybe it would have actually been better that way. So I think if you can work less visually, not work in solo as much, and then not just process because you can, those are like three things that come to mind that that would make a really big difference in, I think, your work. So
That's something I found a lot, is I would try to get things perfect in solo. Figure
yeah,
if everything sounds perfect there, it's all going
yeah,
to sound great. And then you put it all together and everything's fighting for your attention
yeah,
because
yeah.
everything is
Yeah, like
full.
you said, it's a mix. I mean, it's more about how everything works together. It's not about, I always say we're not mastering, mastering X number of multi-tracks. We're mixing these down to, a stereo file,
Right.
and they'll have to play well together. And sometimes leaving some junk in sounds better than taking it out. And so I think that's why if you can work less in solo, you'll preserve some of the things that actually need to be there that may not sound great when it's soloed. So. Yep.
Yeah. And sometimes things might actually sound kind of bad soloed. I've had this happen many times where, especially the guitar thing, because as a guitar player, you get all caught up in your tone and stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
I found sometimes my guitars sit really nice when they're kind of thin,
Yeah.
and it lets them work in cooperation with the bass. The
Mm-hmm.
bass does that job of supporting.
Yeah.
Um, it's such a hard thing to resist, though, because like you said, you've got all the tools, you've got the ability to just really listen to this one element really
Mm-hmm.
close all by itself.
Mm-hmm.
But that's not how we're going to be presenting this when it's all said and done.
Right. Yeah. No. Those are three things that I think if you can do those three things, then, and if you're not doing those three things, if you can do those now, I think your work will be better overnight for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. I've definitely overmixed things and ruined it many times in my life.
Yeah, it's easy to suck the life. I think, and as everyone says, mid range is the most important. But mid range, at least to me, always sounds. That's usually the frequencies when I'm in solo that I'm like, I don't know about that, or ooh, like I said, I hate that like 320 or that 700 or what, and I'll start just sucking that stuff out. And you cut out enough mid range, and you're going to have what we call like the smiley face, EQ, basically where all the mid range is scooped, and there's just no impact. And you don't want to do that, especially when your vocal, especially is in that range. So, that's why I'm a big fan of maybe not EQing as much as using like dynamic EQ or multi-band compression that leaves that information there most of the time. But then when it gets to be a little too much, you can kind of kick it down just a little bit just to keep that tonal balance nice and even. So.
Right. So you'd rather have that stuff happen only when it needs to happen.
Yeah, when it exceeds a certain threshold. Exactly. Exactly. Yep. That's kind of more how I think about it.
Are there any particular plugins or tools you like to use for that stuff?
Yeah, I mean, the FabFilter Pro MB is like a multi-band that I use a lot. Soothe, de-essers. I've got a ton of different ones. They're all fine. You can even trying to think of other things. Yeah, just to tame harshness. That's probably, sometimes just EQ is fine too. Some surgical stuff, maybe taking certain little narrow bands of things out and just keeping those things out. The entire song is fine too. But yeah, that's multi-band, any multi-band, and soothe and de-essing. Those are all for different bands. Obviously, de-essing is for more like the high stuff, and soothe is more for the upper mids. And then if I want to control more lower mids, it's usually multi-band compression or dynamic EQ. So that's kind of how I think about it.
Yeah, that way you can preserve the other stuff too, where you're not just turning everything down.
Yep.
That's nice.
Yep.
And you mentioned saturation too, and I'm finding more and more sometimes that's what I need more than even EQ sometimes. I'm just kind of curious how you're using it these days.
I'm using it a lot.
We're not really talking about distortion like guitars type metal.
No, we're talking about 20 instances
subtle,
of saturation all over the place, just small amounts that kind of add up to be something really exciting. And so I think of saturation as like the excitement, I know it used to be compression. When you think about like a CLA mix or something like that, I mean, obviously he's getting saturation from the way he's hitting, in 1176, but it's different, from saturation's a little bit cleaner without the pumpiness. And so, yeah, I love saturation. I'm a big fan of it. I have many different saturators that I like. I still use Decapitator a bunch. One that's called, I think it's like SDDR by Klinghelm. I like that one. Spectre by Wave Factory is one of my favorites. That's more of a multi-band, which is really nice to just saturate the mid-range for certain elements. And the black box, that's often on my mix bus. So yeah, I'm using just smaller amounts of saturation in a lot of different places, and that gives me the texture and the excitement. And pop music needs to have that typically. It needs to have that like kind of blowing out of the speaker kind of sound. And I find that, saturation is a really good way to get that excitement. So I'm using more saturation than I ever have before. That's for sure.
Right. Yeah. And it's a good point. Yeah. Pop is like, it's got to have that kind of like in your face, cutting edge, exciting thing going on. And that's a good way to do it. And yeah, like the textures are really important there. Like I found I can get things to sit nice with some saturation and sort of just make it feel a little different.
Yeah. And it's going to help
There's too many smooth elements.
Yeah. It makes it really cut through on like iPhone speakers and some of those like real mid-range heavy listening devices that a lot of people consume music now on Bluetooth speakers. It just does that thing in the mid-range that, especially with like, like lower frequency, bass and things like that, being able to do those like upper harmonics really kind of helps those notes kind of cut through. So yeah, no, that's saturation is great. I find myself using it on pretty much everything. And with drums, I don't saturate the drums as a whole as much with saturation. I do sometimes, but it's usually like different saturators on different sources. Like for certain things, I like certain saturators, and I've just found that for like a kick or snare bus, I love Decapitator, but for my mix bus, I love Black Box, and I love Spectre more for like an acoustic guitar or maybe a vocal. And so it's just a lot of experimentation and trying different things and going, okay, usually for this type of source material, I like this, saturator, and I've just kind of got a list in my head now, and that's usually my starting point, but it can always change too.
How much are you thinking about how your mixes sound on little iPhone speakers and little portable?
I'm thinking a lot about it.
I'm sometimes appalled about how much I see students, they listen to like right on the iPhone. That's it.
Yeah.
And part of me is like, oh no, it's like probably the worst way to listen to anything. But since that's what people are doing, do you check on those speakers when you're doing mixes? Do you bounce around to like different speakers in the car, all that kind of stuff?
I love this question because I love talking about translation, because as a mixer, translation is everything. Yeah. I want my mixes to sound amazing on every speaker in the entire world, and so the approach that I take is I have like a very super high fidelity listening environment, but then also a very like dumb it down kind of environment as well here in my studio. And, so I've got like the big like 3-way Neumanns with 2 subs and all that's like super flat from 20 to 20. And that's like my very surgical, detailed listening environment. So I'll work there most of the time, but also have the Aventone mix cubes. And that like helps me just focus in on the mid range like an NS10 would. And then I have like some Bose consumer speakers that, sound really cool in a different kind of way. I have a Bluetooth transmitter so I can pop in AirPods at any time and listen that way. I have an application called Airfoil on my computer that allows me to stream my mix directly to my iPhone if I have this certain app pulled up on my iPhone. So yeah, I'm definitely doing a lot of like consumer checks. It's very important for me. Especially with like the iPhone speaker, I check that a lot. I don't do any real car listening tests. That is always a bad thing for me. For me, it's like, listen in my room. I've been in this room 16 years. I know it well. I trust my monitoring. I listen to stuff in here every single day. If it sounds good in here, then I'm okay with that. The car just kind of makes me chase my tail usually. I don't listen to a ton of music in my car too, I think. It's that thing where I'm usually doing more like podcast or audiobooks or something in the car, just because, as you know, like the repetition of just listening to the same song all day long, the last thing you want to do is at the end of the day, go to drive the grocery store and listen to like a bunch more music, and so, yeah, I just don't, the car stereo is amazing. It sounds really great, but it's I don't know. It's just too confusing for me. It's not focused enough or something. I just don't know like the low end well enough. And so, yeah, for me, it's in my room. And if I'm confused, pulling up a reference, and references are super helpful, whenever I'm like unsure of where I'm at. So.
Yeah, well, the car, I listen to a lot of music in my car. I have like a 40-minute drive each way.
Okay.
But there's so many other sounds too. There's the sound of the road there, and that either masks things or somehow makes it pop out more.
Yeah.
There's a lot of factors, and I do it really to like just see like I'm not really off base on anything.
Yeah.
So I can get that. But I think, that's so important. It's the thing that drives a lot of people nuts. It sounds great here. It sounds terrible here. But I guess, what you're saying too is you really know your room. So you really know what to expect. I think that's so important. Even if it is your car on some level, if you know it, then you have some reference.
Yeah, I think if you do listen to a lot of music on your car and you've had your car for a long time, I think that's important too. Same with in your room. The longer that you can like leave your acoustic treatment untouched and leave your monitors where they're at and not swap them for a different brand. I mean, anything that you can like leave alone for a long period of time and get to know, I think that's when you're making your best decision. So if you're driving in a car that you've been in for 8 years and you listen to music every day in it, then I think it's a great place to check your work. But for me, if the car I have now, I've had it maybe 3 years and I don't listen to much music in it. So it doesn't make sense for me to check my work there because I don't know it as well. I would be better off checking in my world. So I think it's different for everyone, I guess is what I'm saying. I think listening, making those decisions in that environment, on that system that you're most familiar with is probably where you should make most of your decisions.
Yeah, that makes sense. How about taking breaks? How do you do that? I mean, like that's one, our senses are accustomed to changes, right? So all of our senses work that way. Hearing, like you could have the air conditioner on all day, not notice it until it stops. So we get used to frequencies, we get used to the stimulus that's coming to us. And again, as somebody that's freelancing and time is precious, how do you balance that? Because there's, I guess, one train of thought that would say, well, if I take a break, I'm losing time. But then maybe there's the other train of thought, if I don't take a break, I'm going to eventually lose more time that way.
No, I think taking breaks is super, super important. And I didn't do that early on in my career just because I didn't want to stop, It was too much fun, and just kept going and kept going. But it's just another thing that I've learned over the years that actually like taking a few breaks here and there will actually get you to completion quicker than often working like nonstop, especially with mixing. I don't know, maybe it's not the case with production, but with mixing, I always talk about how like that first 10 or 20 minutes of opening up a mix and listening, like that's when you have the most clarity and when it's easiest to hear what's still wrong with the mix. So I encourage people to, work an hour, take a 20-minute break, work an hour, take a 20-minute break, some type of, frequency like that, I think is a good approach. Because what those breaks do is they give you a complete reset, to where then you have that fresh perspective, 20 minutes later, when you pull it back up, you're like, oh my gosh, the bass is like 5 dB too loud, or, oh, the vocal sounds like way too dry, or those things that like really move the needle, kind of pop up. Because after those first 10 or 20 minutes, you start to get lost in the mix and you're not thinking big picture. You're thinking like very detail oriented, like, ooh, that vocal needs to, come up just a 1/10 of a dB in this second chorus, that's important to me too. But if you're making that, but then your bass is, like I said, 5 dB too loud, then that's the kind of thing that, it'd be nice to know about. So, yeah, I think if you can, I'm not the type that's like, I'm going to work for 10 straight hours without any breaks. I mean, I do my best work probably in the morning, the front half of the day. I think a lot of people are probably like that. My ears just feel the freshest. So I'll do, maybe from, 8 or 9 in the morning until lunchtime, work for an hour. Like I said, take a little break and catch up on some emails or do some outreach or run a quick errand or something like that. And then come back to it again. And And, once I do that, it's just like, oh, okay, now I can just make like more progress in a shorter amount of time, I think, by doing that. So I like to work that way. My typical approach to a mix is to start it in the morning, work all day on it with taking those breaks, and then the following day, pulling it up, hoping that it's like at least 80 to 90% of the way done, making some final like changes on fresh ears. Once again, that's after a night's sleep, so you kind of hear even more, and then sending it off to the client, by lunchtime on that second day. That's what I found works best for me. Some people say they mix 2 or 3 songs in a day. I can't work that way. There's usually a lot of content in the stuff that I mix, and I'm a perfectionist. Like I can't like get into like do the super, super detailed stuff that I really want to be able to do and do a couple songs in a day. But some people, their style is different. They're a little bit more hands off, and it's cool that way too. But for me, I want it to be as perfect as I can make it before ever sending it out to the artist and the producer. So that's typically how I like to work.
Yeah. I think it's smart because you mentioned you're focusing on details, right? But you can't also lose the big picture. Right. And getting that reset every once in a while is important, because I've done the long days, the long sessions, forget to eat, feel all weird afterwards, and then you're done for the day.
Yeah.
But sometimes you just really lose track of what you're doing.
Yep.
Like you said, the bass is way out of it, and like. Or there's just like these biting frequencies that you've just become accustomed to and totally numb to.
Exactly.
Yeah, it seems counterintuitive, but it does sort of keep you moving a lot quicker.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Do you have specific reference tracks you like to come back to, or do you just kind of go more with like what the people give you?
Usually, I have like a library of WAV files I've purchased over the years, and I can load those into what's it called, metric AB, I think, if I want to do like some level match AB type stuff. But what I typically do, usually, if they give me a reference, that's what I'm following and nothing else, because then I think it'd just be a little confusing to kind of go between 3 different things. And so. Yeah, if they don't give me a reference, but I want one, then I'll start looking for one. I think something worth mentioning is, making sure that your reference is in the ballpark of like, tempo and content and all those things. If it's something completely different, then it's not really helping, But I typically only use references, I guess, when they provide one in that consultation that I have with them up front. And it's very important to, not only know what that reference is, but what it is that they like about it. You may be chasing this reference and you may be trying to get the drums just right and the bass just like that and the vocals, and find out that the only thing they liked was the airiness of the drums or something, something very small. And then you've kind of gone off and went in the complete wrong direction and have to like unwind a bunch of things. So yeah, once you do get that reference, find out what it is. If they like the overall feel about it, then that's important too. Like one of the songs I mixed about a month ago, there was a reference and it was super helpful because it let me know, okay, I need to like do this with the low end. I need to like really saturate like a lot of things in a very specific way. And do something with the guitars a very specific way. And so that reference was like very similar to the song that I was mixing, and it was, super helpful. But if you're doing a pop track and they give you a country thing, then okay, you got to figure out, why did they send you a song like this? Oh, it's just because they like their pop song has this banjo in it randomly, and they just want like their banjo to sound like the banjo in this country song, So, that's a good question to always ask: is what is it about this reference that you like? But I usually don't use them if they don't provide them.
Mm-hmm. Nice.
Usually, if they don't provide them, then their rough mix, which isn't always very rough, that's what is a lot more important. Because, like I said earlier on in the conversation, it's often that it's like, we love this; it's 80% there to us. Like, we want you just to get like 20% out of it, And so, for me, that's looking for like, where are things clashing, or what could I do? How could I add to this, like kind of where they left off, and often it's sweetening up the vocal or the low ends out of whack because they're in a poor monitoring environment, or there's just too much frequency masking and I need to get in there and like pan some stuff around or carve some certain frequencies out to make everything like have its own space. So that's that's usually what I'm thinking about more than reference mixes, but they're both important.
When you're looking for masking frequencies,
Mm-hmm.
frequencies that are overlapping and competing with each other, are you using any particular tools? Is it just by ear? There's EQs, or there? I mean,
Yeah,
like I know
it's
Isotope has some stuff that'll find that and help you.
yeah, I
Any
think it's all just more
approach you like?
ears and instinctual, like,
Yeah,
just, going, okay, like something's clashing. Oh, it's the snare and the vocal. Okay, well, it's because the snare's like got a ton of 400 hertz and it's like the vocal is in that region on the verses. So let's just cut that out of the snare. Who, just kind of figuring out who like gets to keep certain frequencies and who I need to take some away
yeah.
from, And I even like using stuff like like side chaining some like track spacer. I just did a mix last week where the vocal and the acoustic guitar were like the two primary things in the song, but they were kind of fighting a little bit in the mid range. And so just, getting, putting track spacer on the acoustic guitar and letting like that vocal, sending that vocal to the acoustic guitar that would kind of like cut some of those frequencies out of the acoustic at times when the vocal was singing, and just adapting that made a huge difference. So I use a lot of techniques like that when it comes to frequency masking, and sometimes like soloing like the kick and the bass together and trying to figure out, okay, who's going to have like the lower end and who's going to have like the upper end of the low frequencies. And so I think that's a good way to work. I know I said don't solo, but I think if you're soloing like multiple things, it's not as bad as, soloing just the vocal, making the vocal sound great, soloing just the bass, make the bass sound great, and then just trying to level all that into place. That's when I think you get into a lot more trouble. But yeah, and typically it's EQ that I'm using for those issues. The fader and an EQ is probably the two things that I use the most that make the biggest difference. Everything else kind of comes after that. I think, level and EQ by far are what moves the needle the most in my world. So yeah, hopefully that answered your question. And I sometimes spectrum analyzers too. I always have a secondary, just a mini display that has FabFilter Pro Q3. That's one of my favorite spectrum analyzers, and that's just on the output of my mix bus, and then I can just kind of see tonally like the big picture, and if it's this certain kind of curve, then I know that like the tonal balance is just where it needs to be. I know Isotope has a tonal balance application, and the version of Ozone that I use has something similar. But I just know the FabFilter curve well, and I listen to a lot of other records while looking at those curves. So it just lets me know, if there's a huge spike at 2.2K, then maybe my vocal like has way too much of that, or it tells me some of those kinds of things that maybe I might overlook. Or if the bottom end is too much, then on the far left, that that curve will be higher than it needs to be. And so that's like, I said don't work visually, but that is one way that I work visually, that it's more of like my just occasionally look and see what my big picture is looking like. Or if you have a reference mix, you can go back and forth and see if, the tonal balance of your mix is comparable to your references. And if you see that your top end is like curving way differently, then maybe you have like way too much or way too little high end. And so those kinds of things can be beneficial, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And you hear that a lot, mixed with your ears, not with your eyes. But sometimes you can catch things. It's about not changing a mix that you think sounds good because it doesn't look good.
Right,
Like,
exactly.
why isn't that going the way I want it to?
Yeah, it's really easy to, I'm a big fan of what I call like the blind A/B test. And if you think that you need to EQ something because it looks weird, go ahead and do that EQ and have, Pro Q3 set to like auto gain the output to where it doesn't add or subtract any gain. And just close your eyes and hit like the bypass super, super, super fast. So you're like click it 20 times and then you don't know if it's on or off. And then, could do that a few times and decide which one you like. And then that is what you need to go with. And very often you'll find that it's actually the way you had it before is a lot better than, that EQ that you thought you needed to do because it looked better, So yeah, I think there's like certain times where working visually is a good thing and can be helpful. And then certain times where it can be really bad. So it's just knowing, keeping yourself in check, I guess, is important.
Yeah, good point. And how about things like headroom, Is there a certain point you're aiming for? You hear rules and things get thrown around a
Yeah.
lot, and there's a lot of contradictory information. Are you looking at that too much? Are you trying to get your like master outputs to hit a certain spot?
I don't think too much about it. I'm a little bit more just comfortable in my world now, in knowing like where things need to live and how I need to hit my mix bus. If I'm just starting to mix and I'm getting like my kick and snare hitting just right, then maybe that's, I don't know, anywhere between -12 and -6, somewhere around there. But I'm not even really thinking about it. I'm often like turning on the mix, everything that's in my mix bus, like my starting point, and just like pushing the kick and snare into it in different ways, just to kind of see how it reacts, really. And when I find that I really love how the mix bus is responding to where the kick and the snare relationship is currently at, then that's usually where I'll start. I can bypass everything really quick just to make sure I'm not like clipping the input of, my plug-in chain on my mix bus. But because once those are in a good spot, pretty much everything else that I do doesn't push that any further along, those big kick and snare, because I mix my drums pretty far forward, so everything else kind of stays behind that, for the most part, and there's still quite a few dB of headroom even after that. So I'm not really thinking too much. I'm not like following any of these gain staging approaches or anything like that. I just kind of know, from doing it for so many years, kind of where things need to be. But and then my mixes when I print them are really hot. I mean, they're anywhere from like -10 LUFS to down to -7. Sometimes like where people would actually master to. Often the mastering engineer, there's not much room left for them. It's just a couple small EQ tweaks and maybe get another dB out of it or something like that. It's pretty small stuff. But I think that just comes with like experience and confidence and like knowing where everyone wants to go with it. And for me, I enjoy working on it when it's just loud and exciting on my end. If it's super dynamic and not really processed on the mix bus side of things, then I'm not like for sure exactly where it's going to go once it gets to mastering. I like knowing that it's pretty much there by the time it leaves my world, just because I have so much more control over it than mastering would ever have. And usually there's usually there's no complaints. Obviously, if I'm working with a new mastering engineer and they say, "Oh, this is too loud," then I'm fine. Like giving them a bit more headroom. But usually my limiter's not even engaging. It's just maybe adding 3 or 4 or 5 dB of level, but there's not actually any gain reduction even happening. I think it's just everything is, before it gets there, is kind of nice and either limited or compressed on a bus level or an individual track level, to where just dynamically it's pretty controlled by the time it goes through everything in my chain. So,
right. What do you have in your chain?
It kind of varies. Usually I'll start with a saturator, something like Black Box, and then I'm a big fan of the McDSP ML4000, which is, I'm just using that for multi-band compression. It's a very subtle amount, but that kind of really does something special. It takes out a bunch of junk somehow and just cleans things up. And then from there, often like just an SSL bus compressor, the UAD one. And then from there, I really like the Waves Abbey Road mastering console. It has a really great EQ that I love, which you can also pop in mid-side, which is nice. And then it's got good filters. The stereo imaging on that is really nice too. So that's kind of where I'll do more like, if I want musical EQ, either stereo or mid-side, and the stereo width, a lot of that happens there. And then from there, it goes to Oxford Inflator, which is once again about excitement for me. Getting things a little bit louder without a limited sound. And then Ozone is the last thing that, I was using the Pro L2, I guess, the fab filter limiter, and I was using that for a while, but then I switched over, maybe a year or two ago, to the newest version of Ozone, and really like the way that limiter sounds. And the nice thing about that is I can do some like finishing touches with, it's almost like I'm kind of like pre-mastering really in a way, with my mixes. So I'm often, still doing like some EQ there by the time it makes to there, or some dynamic EQ, maybe some more widening as well there. And then, like I said, with the limiter, it's normally just me pulling that down like 3 or 4 or 5 dB, and it's not actually like knocking any peaks off of anything. It's making it a little bit louder, and it's kind of more of a safety, just to make sure I don't clip. So that's like my current chain, and quite a few of those things have been in it for a long time, especially the Mic DSP ML4000. That's something that I really, really like, that almost, I feel like, helps give it that pop sound, it's almost like it takes the mix apart and puts it back together in a different kind of way. I don't know if that's with the way the crossovers work or something, but what it does to the low mids for me, it puts everything in its own place, it reorganizes it in a better way, the mix. And so I love that plugin. And that most of this, it's all, everything in that chain is doing very subtle, just a small amount, of saturation, just a very small amount of compression, just a small amount, or no limiting at all, and it's all just there to kind of, coloration is part of it, but it also adds to the excitement by taking some of the dynamics away in a good way. So that's what I like at the moment.
Yeah. That's cool. And yeah, I think it's a lot about subtle things,
Mm-hmm.
lots of little subtle things that add up to a big thing.
That's what I'm doing. Hundreds or thousands of moves for, 10 or 12 hours sometimes. And just to make up, something that's really interesting to listen to. That's really what mixing is.
It's amazing when you break it down to like how many individual small decisions you make along the way.
Oh yeah, I'd love to track how many times I click the mouse button on a mix. I mean, it's probably it's probably just thousands of times between opening plugin editors and moving stuff around, and it's when you really like dissect a mix, you start to see, especially all the automation layers, and that's half of the work that I do, really, is just writing a lot of automation, especially on the vocal side of things, the lead vocal, between level and effects and different amounts of effects and different sections and throws and all that kind of stuff. So it just takes time. That's why I don't know how you could mix 2 songs in a day. I could if I was forced to. That's not like my preferred way to work. I like to really just optimize the mix as much as I possibly can.
Well, I'm sure clients appreciate that.
Yeah, I hope so. That's what I want to be known for. Yeah. Yep. Precise mixes. That's how I describe my work, and I think for precision, not everyone likes precision, but I do. That's why I like Serban. I think his mixes sound very precise. It's just, everything has its own space, and you can hear pretty much everything all the time. Certain things, are a bit more up front and certain things are back, but you still it's not just like this wall of sound. It's more of like this I don't know what you would call it, there's a word I'm trying to think of where it's everything kind of the sound soundscape. Is that the word I'm looking? Is that a thing? I don't know. But basically, it's just this open image where you can just kind of, hear what is happening with every single piece of content. I mean, if it's there, it's probably important in some way. It's just trying to figure out what's most important and what's least important, and kind of ordering things as you're mixing.
When does panning come into your workflow? Do you start that right away? Do you ever do anything where you sync right away?
Yeah, right away. And in the pop world, it's usually like you've either got a mono vocal or everything else there's a lot of stereo content. So there's a lot less panning, I feel like, maybe in the pop space. Whereas if I'm doing something that has like a lot of
because your files are already...
exactly. Yeah. I mean, so your kick sample, and lots of times I'll narrow certain things, like, like a kick sample if it feels too wide. But I mean, lots of times if it's like just samples and synths and all that, it's all stereo content. Whereas if you're going to mix something more traditional, then you may have like whatever, 2 mono acoustic guitars and like a mono shaker and some of those things where it's like, then you start to think about, is this hard left or is this like 50% left? And I know a lot of people that are great mixers that are like all about the left, center, right, and nothing else, and that's never worked I never liked that. There's certain elements that when I pan them to like hard left or right, it just feels weird, especially if I have like 4 different mono guitars going at once. Just to pan like 2 left and 2 right, if they're doing different things, I don't know. I just like having more of a just a space for each of them, and so maybe, like I said, one is hard left, one is 50% left, one is 50% right, one's hard right, and you're thinking more of it, like everyone has its own place to play. I know that people will say that will make your mixes feel more narrow, but I'm okay with that. It doesn't bother me, especially if you're listening on an iPhone. That's already a narrow way to listen to a mix.
Yeah, not getting much stereo image out of that.
Yeah. So, so that's when I'm making those panning decisions. It's usually like really, really early on when I'm just kind of leveling things out. But then I may be fine tuning. I may find out, 10% more to the left or 10% more to the right. Feels a little bit better. Or oftentimes I'll automate panning. To where it's like maybe this guitar, there's not much content in the verses in the center of the image. And so I want this guitar here, but then, in the chorus, like lots of stuff comes in. So I may want to, I can maybe move it out to make the image feel wider when the chorus hits. And so I'm thinking a little bit about that too, especially with mono sources, automating things along the way.
Right. I've had some luck saving panning for later, because I've found that I'm a little more, like, I'm trying to get things to actually fit instead of just moving it over here.
Right.
So I can hear it. And I think I've been a little better about volume and EQ that way. Now it's my own stuff. So I've got, my files, however I made them. I kind of know what is supposed to happen with a lot of the stereo stuff, but it does sort of open up a nice little treat at the end when it's okay, I got it balanced nice. And now I can start positioning things and get some space out of it. And that's kind of a fun thing. But I'm with you. I was never able to be satisfied with just left, center, right.
Yeah.
Like, it's just a little too harsh or something.
Yeah. When I have a lot of mono elements, I like to spread them around a little bit more. But once again, that's just me. Yeah. And I'm okay with, like I said,
I love that technique of in the chorus to widen things. Automate things to the sides.
I do all kinds of, like or bumping the entire mix up, half a dB when the chorus hits, or maybe the bass is lighter in the verses, or, lots of times drier vocals, in the verses, and then more like doubling and more verbs or delays in the, all that kind of stuff. You've got to create this really exciting journey, and you don't have much time to do it in. And that's, I think, what makes, pop music especially really interesting is there's a little bit more. I feel like oftentimes there's more happening like behind the scenes that just kind of makes it more engaging.
Yeah, and that's actually what I really enjoy the most about a lot of pop is all the production and the techniques that go into it to make it have that energy and excitement.
Yep.
That's because that is one thing that, I guess what gets it into pop radio world where it's exciting, it's new, it's fresh,
slick,
so slick, so what are the things that are happening there? Those are fun. It's a cool techniques to just sort of save it, and then it opens up.
Yeah, don't give it all to them too soon. You gotta, if you really want to make the chorus, hit hard, you got to save a few things and hold a few things back. And so, I love just creating that drama. It's one of my favorite things about mixing, really, is just trying to make it really, engage the listener. I mean, that's what my job is I'm kind of like this, this person that's what it is. It's like, you give me the content and I got to do something with this to like get you to like really
director almost.
To just make you like stop and listen, and so I still think that the job of a mixer is important, and hopefully it doesn't go away anytime soon, and hopefully AI can't figure it out.
I don't know. I don't think so. I think it'll be tools that help out. There are some cool, like, I guess there's some sort of artificial intelligence in some of the plugins now that are nice and helpful, but you still have to make those creative human decisions. And the element of surprise is a big thing, but also is familiarity. And I think there's a lot of art. I think especially for like pop, like you said, like if it's more of a band, it's kind of the band does the thing. They make the stuff happen. But a lot of the excitement in pop music is a little more production based, like you said, kind of the behind the scenes stuff. And I think a lot of times those are the stars of the show.
Yeah.
The choices that are made in the mixes and the production.
Yep, for sure.
Well, that's really cool. I appreciate you sharing all this with us and answering some of my questions here, the ones that I was able to put together and articulate.
Of course. Yeah, I love talking about this stuff. I mean, I tell people I love doing it just as much, maybe even more now than I did, when I was a kid. So it's just, yeah, it's my favorite thing to talk about. So yeah, no problem at all.
It's the beauty of this kind of stuff, any kind of art, I suppose, is that it's like this world that keeps expanding.
Yeah.
And the further you go into it, the more it grows out, the more you realize there is to learn and the more there is to explore.
Yeah. It's
like
less stressful, doing it now because I've learned a lot of things along the way. I'm not pulling my hair out and doing, 30 mix revisions on a song, and so I think that's the beauty behind it is the longer you do it, the better you get at it and the more enjoyable really it is because you actually kind of know what you're doing. You're not figuring it out along the way as much. So yeah, maybe that's
the fun with it. Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe that's why I think the content gets better too. As you get experience, you get people giving you better content and better content like is more stimulating, I think, just more fun to work on. And so all those things kind of come into play, I guess.
So cool. You've got some nice stuff. You've got your website, BrentHendrich.com. That's BrentHendrich.com. Also, your Instagram is pretty cool and active. You've got basically interviews going on there from time to time, which I think are really nice.
Yeah.
Talking to fellow mixers and other people in the industry about what they do. I think if you're listening to this, you're probably going to be into that. It's very similar conversation stuff that you have. I think that's really cool and helpful. Any other place you like to send people?
Yeah, I mean, I think the website is great because, a lot of podcasts I've been on, those are there in articles and all my reels if you want to hear my work. And even the Instagram feed comes in there as well. So that's a great place. And also, if you want to get a hold of me, there's a contact form. So that's a good place to maybe start as a landing page. But like you said, my Instagram is where I'm most active. It's usually 3 or 4 posts a week and stories. And so I'm sharing mix tips. And like you mentioned, every 2 weeks, I'm doing that series I call The Process, where I talk with pop producers that I'm friends with and kind of just learn about their specific, unique way that they make records. So I think a lot of people have gotten a lot of value out of those. The next one, I guess depending on when this comes out, it's usually every 2 weeks. Every other Friday is kind of my goal. So you can catch those there. I'm a big fan of like community as well. For a couple of years now, I've been doing a thing called Sonic Mixer, where it's just Nashville producers, engineers, session musicians, songwriters. We hang out. I buy coffee at a coffee shop, and tomorrow is actually our next one. And so that's the last Tuesday of every month. So if you're ever in Nashville on the last Tuesday of a month, come hang out with us for that. I guess that's cool. About it. That's kind of like some other things that I'm interested in right now. Like I said, learning from other people and building community and just obviously trying to get better every single day as a mixer as well.
Well, it sounds great. I wish you continued success.
Appreciate that.
And thank you very much for taking the time to talk. And anytime you want to come back and talk some more, I'm always game. I learned a ton talking to you. Got a lot of fun ideas and inspiration and some plugins even to check out too.
Great. That's good to hear.
But it is, the holiday season with all the sales and stuff. So
yeah, they're going to be pushing it. You're going to be, you'll probably get an email right after this and
they heard me say it. Yeah, well, cool. But thanks, Brent. It was really nice talking to you.
You're very welcome. It was nice talking with you too.
Thank you for listening to the Music Production Podcast. If you want to help support the show, the best thing you can do is tell a friend, someone you think that would enjoy the show. I'd also love it if you could leave a review wherever you get your podcasts. And if you want to support my work, you can go to brianfunk.com. I've got tons of Ableton Live packs, tutorials, samples. You can check out my book, The 5-Minute Music Producer, which gives you 365 short music-making activities to help you get started, stay inspired, and finish more music. And there's also the Music Production Club, where you get my latest releases as soon as they're finished. It gives you access to a community of like-minded people who are making music and sharing ideas. You can share your music, find new collaborators, and participate in our live meetings where we set up some kind of musical challenge and then make music together and share our results at the end. That's the Music Production Club. It's a lot of fun, and you can find that and everything that I do at brianfunk.com. Thanks again for listening to the show, and have a great day.